Hello everyone. Welcome to this tutorial on data science through Python. And in this specific tutorial, we're actually going to cover what is going to be the main purpose of learning all sorts of data types like JSON, CSV, XML, etc. So the main agenda we're covering over here is what is the data transportation and exchange problems, web server client architecture, web services, and other scenarios where these sort of data types could be used or useful. So let's talk about the main problem, which is data transportation or exchange, or what is the data transportation exchange problem? Basically, whenever we are on the internet and we've got lots of points between which we've to transfer data, it could be one of the PS, or it could be server from client or from client to server. So in such sort of scenarios, we actually have to transfer the file, and if the file isn't efficient or lesser in size, you won't be able to transfer it that quickly, which we usually do. So for example, let's say if we have JSON, XML, or CSV, they are optimized in such a way where lots of metadata has been removed so that they're perfect for transporting from one point to another on the internet. So our first case scenario, let's talk about web server client case scenario. It's a very common scenario. You might be accessing lots of websites on a daily basis, and you might be having to enter the URL addresses of them. So what actually happens is, let's say we have a server, look at some point to over here, and we hit the URL, and it goes to some sort of HTTP request, and it processes the request, and then it gives us the response. Now, thing to notice is, actually, meanwhile, generating the response, most of the time, it accesses the database. So obviously the database, tuples, and rows are pretty heavy, and there are lots of metadata attached to it, and we can't just send them over just like that. We often have to strip off data out of it, which is actually not useful while transporting over the internet. So obviously we'll have to come up with some sort of data exchange format if it could be actually efficient and exchange over internet speed. And now also there's one more issue, that once it has been exported or imported or to and from the client side technology should be able to process it pretty easily and in a swift manner. So whatever data sources, what we've been talking about so far, for example, CSV, JSON, or XML, they're pretty efficient in that manner. So let's take a live example. So we have a website. Basically, it's a France-based website of real estate agents. And what it does is, this is basically a search box. And I would like to open the console. For monitoring the data packets, and we will switch to the network tab. Now, if we go for and search for specific term, we actually see suggestions. You can say that I entered ILLE. It shows me some sort of reasons for suggestion and all. So all these values are actually stored in database, and they are not transported as it is. They are actually, first of all, converted into some sort of data transport exchange format or something. Could be something like CSV or JSON. So let's take the network tab over here, and you can see that we have some requests going on over here. So once we check the header of this request, this is basically an AJAX request, and if we check out the response, let's copy it. And if you try to see the previous of this particular response, you can see that it's basically a JSON, a key value pair for each and every specific value which has been returned from the server, which was again stored in a particular database. So even they choose JSON because it's pretty efficient and fast. So this entire framework, which processes the data and serves in a form of JSON service, is called REST API, but we are not talking about that right now. So the main purpose was to show that these exchange formats are pretty used in most of the scenarios. Now this is one sort of website. We can talk about SOAP, which is yet another protocol to exchange data between data and server and client. So instead of JSON, this SOAP service uses XML, and it's also a sort of web service. So as you can see over here, simple object access protocol, and it actually uses XML. So again, XML is also sort of a data exchange format which actually uses quite often between data server and the data client. Now let's talk about CSV. Actually, we're talking about once we some sort of data exchange format, what should be the specific attributes of it. First of all, it should be pretty swift and lightweight so that it can be transported from the point quick and easily, and it should also be able to be accessed from a client site in a very easy way. For example, JSON is actually processed by JavaScript and it is pretty easy to manipulate, and so goes with XML, but CSV actually is just a comma separated value. So we've been talking about web server and client architecture and how these exchange servers are actually used between web server and client in the form of web services. So as we talk about REST API, which actually servers JSON in the form of data exchange format so that the client side can easily process it, which one point of view and the other point of view that once these exchange formats are actually processed on the client side, the ease of how easily they are actually processed also matters. So CSV actually not easy to process because it actually same text file and it might take a little bit of more programming rather than JSON or an XML. So where is it used? We've been frequently talking about UIDAI website, which actually provides data in form of CSV. CSV stands for comma separated values. So why CSV? That is the main question. We could actually download this entire data through Excel as well, but CSV is pretty lightweight and there is no meta around it. So the good part of it is, let's say if you have downloaded it, some sort of CSV file, and the same amount of data is stored in a file, the Excel file would be pretty large comparatively. Now you could say that nowadays there's actually a provision where you can store the file in a form of binary format of Excel, which actually decreases the file size to quite extent. But we can do that as well. But again, the point of view from which that particular binary file has to access on the client side, that goes in a pretty complex way as far as the binary files are concerned of Excel. So CSV is again pretty successful over here. That is why lots of websites provide their data in the form of CSV. So once they have to provide in some sort of API, for example, this French website called Celoger, they do that in JSON. Now let's talk about yet another scenario where CSV is frequently used. CSV is quite frequently used for importing and exporting data from database server. So I've just opened my PHP, my admin demo website. It is actually a tool to manage your database of MySQL, which can be synced along with PHP, and it is pretty helpful in creating websites based on PHP. So you don't need to go that deep. Over here you can actually see lots of options. For example, database SQL status. Don't get confused with that. Let's get to the database. Over here there are lots of databases. So for example, let's check one of them. Now you can see over here there are a few options over here. For example, let's check out the export option. And CSV is also over here. So let's go and download it. Now it has been downloaded. We can actually check it, and that was actually not a huge database. So you can go over here and download lots of data tables and format of CSV. And you can even import in the form of CSV. You can actually select lots of formats over here. Maybe YML, XML, CSV, and JSON, but in all of them, CSV will be the most efficient. So this was it for this entire tutorial. What my main point was to do that. The main problem was that data exchange and data transportation is actually solved by these formats, and they are frequently used across databases, web servers over here. So I hope you found this tutorial pretty helpful. See you in the next tutorial.
I hope you enjoyed our YouTube videos, and I really appreciate that if you could subscribe to our videos, which will also encourage me to give more such videos in the times to come. And you can also watch some of our popular programs which have been liked by a lot of viewers. See you soon.